Hollywood once sparkled with flashing cameras, red carpets, and stars who seemed like flawless gods under the spotlight. But one voice, Paul Newman, once shattered that illusion with a truth so brutal, it sent shockwaves through the entire industry. Behind all the smiles and golden statues, he said, lived something far darker. Something real people didn't want to see. Newman revealed that behind those glimmering facades were twisted secrets. He spoke about starlet mothers who used their own kids for fame, powerful men who lured young women into rooms that locked from the inside, and Hollywood giants who threw real punches that dropped their co-stars right on set. These weren't movie roles anymore. They were real crimes that the studios had buried deep for decades. And among those names Newman mentioned, one chilled everyone to the bone: Errol Flynn, the swashbuckling hero who had once made audiences cheer as Robin Hood. Back in the late 1930s, as the adventures of Robin Hood took theaters by storm, fans were obsessed with Flynn's charm, his daring grin, mischievous eyes, and that smooth confidence that made every magazine swoon. Photoplay even called him the man every woman longed for and every man wanted to be. But under that perfect Hollywood glow, Flynn's life was drowning in wild rumors. From Beverly Hills to the Sunset Strip, whispers followed him everywhere. Things exploded in 1942 when he faced serious charges in Los Angeles involving two underage girls. For months, newspapers couldn't get enough of it. The Los Angeles Examiner blasted headlines like, "Robin Hood in the dock." Inside court, prosecutors painted vivid pictures of late-night parties in Flynn's lavish Hollywood Hills apartment. An anonymous witness told the Daily News, "The room was always thick with smoke and loud laughter." Flynn would stroll in like a king, surrounded by faces far too young to even understand what kind of world they were standing in. The trial became a circus. Fans lined up, journalists crammed the halls, even reporters from overseas came to witness the spectacle. But when the verdict came down, Flynn walked out a free man. Lighting a cigarette with that same movie star grin, he said smugly, "The ladies will still love this Robin Hood." That line reached Paul Newman's ears years later, and he reportedly told friends, "I had never seen arrogance so naked." Flynn had beaten the case, but he didn't escape the whispers. Variety ran with the headline, "Robin Hood's Triumph Over Justice." But those inside Hollywood knew the truth. Flynn's freedom wasn't just luck. Behind him stood the studios, the lawyers, and the reporters, who all had something to lose if their golden boy fell. Even after his acquittal, the shadows never left him. In 1945, journalist Sheila Graham from Hollywood Citizen News wrote, "If the walls of Errol Flynn's mansion could talk, they would tell stories Hollywood would never want to hear." People whispered that his Mulholland Drive estate hosted endless parties, music, laughter, and rivers of wine. And among those crowds, there were always guests far too young to see the danger glowing in the lights. A haunting confession once surfaced from the memoir of a servant who worked in Errol Flynn's mansion, and it painted a picture straight out of a nightmare. The servant wrote, "I once saw Flynn force guests to sing until he was satisfied. Anyone who refused was thrown out on the spot and blacklisted from any set where Flynn appeared." It was never confirmed, but the tale added another layer to Flynn's legend, charming on the outside, but terrifying up close. By 1959, Flynn's story took a dark final turn. He died at just 50 in Vancouver, Canada, alone, exhausted, and chased by debts and the same whispers that had followed him for years. The coroner's report stunned the public, saying his body looked more like that of a man in his 70s. The New York Post splashed a biting headline across its pages. "Robin Hood dead leaves behind a legacy of films and secrets." The shock wasn't just in his death, but in Hollywood's reaction. Despite every dark rumor, the industry still raised Flynn's name into legend. The daring, sword-swinging Robin Hood was immortalized, while the disturbing truths beneath his fame were quietly buried under red carpets and studio silence. But Flynn wasn't alone in his darkness. Another Hollywood icon carried her own chilling story, one that twisted the meaning of glamour itself. Her name was Joan Crawford, the screen goddess America once adored. Yet behind her dazzling beauty and perfect poise was a mother so ruthless, even the people closest to her froze in fear. Paul Newman, years later in a 1979 New York Times interview, leaned back in his chair, stared coldly at the reporter, and said in a deep voice, "Never believe that an Oscar can hide the darkness within a family. Joan Crawford is the clearest proof." The world still remembers that breathtaking March night in 1946 when Joan stepped on stage in a pure white satin gown to claim her Oscar for Mildred Pierce. The crowd roared. Variety declared on its front page, "Hollywood's Queen Reborn." But hours later, inside her Brentwood mansion, that crown of glory twisted into horror. A maid, whose testimony appeared decades later in the Los Angeles Daily News, claimed that after the celebration ended, Crawford stormed into her adopted daughter Christina's bedroom. Christina, just 11, was yanked from bed and forced to stand before a mirror. "Sing the national anthem," Crawford ordered. When the girl faltered, the maid said, "A slap cracked through the room so loud I still hear it in my dreams." Christina would later describe her childhood in Mommy Dearest, a life wrapped in luxury but soaked in fear. She wrote that clothes hangers became whips, glass ashtrays turned into weapons. A former classmate told ABC News years later that even in the blazing July heat, Christina wore long sleeves every day. When asked why, she whispered, "My mother doesn't want anyone to see the bruises." But the torment went far beyond bruises. Crawford's control was relentless. She placed an hourglass in Christina's room, forcing her to stand perfectly still until every grain of sand fell. If she moved, the punishment doubled. One housemaid's leaked diary entry told of a night when Crawford made Christina kneel before a crucifix for hours, screaming, "You should thank God for having me as your mother." It sounded more like a twisted ritual than a lesson in faith. The cruelest part was how completely Crawford fooled the world. Hollywood adored her image as a model mother. Life magazine even put her on the cover in May 1950, smiling in a white dress surrounded by her adopted children. But photographer Lawrence Schiller later revealed the horrifying truth. Minutes before that picture was taken, Christina had been beaten so hard her comb snapped in two. And right after, she was forced to smile for the camera as if nothing had happened. Even death couldn't silence the nightmare. When Crawford passed away in 1977, the pain she left behind spilled into the headlines once again. During the will reading in Manhattan, the room froze as the lawyer read the line that would go down in Hollywood infamy, "For reasons which they well know." With that, Christina and Christopher, the children who had endured the most, were cut out of their inheritance entirely. The glamour was gone, and only the scars of her legacy remained. The Washington Post didn't hold back. It called Joan Crawford's will the coldest in Hollywood history. A lawyer who sat in the room whispered afterward, "It was the only time I saw a mother take revenge on her children, even after death." Paul Newman, speaking to Esquire, didn't sugarcoat it either. "Crawford may have been a queen on screen," he said, "but at home, she was a tyrant. The most terrifying thing is that she still found ways to punish her children even in death." If Crawford ruled her home through fear and control, the next name Newman exposed ruled his through pain and punishment. He said it with a bitter edge. Bing Crosby, the so-called King of Christmas. Chapter 3. Bing Crosby, the hellish father who drove his children to despair. The world adored him. America's golden voice, the man whose White Christmas became the best-selling song in history. In the 1950s, Life magazine ran glowing family photos, and NBC crowned him America's model father. But inside his grand Holmby Hills mansion, his children lived a nightmare that no Christmas song could ever drown out. Gary Crosby, Bing's eldest son, broke the silence in his 1983 memoir, Going My Own Way. His words hit like a confession straight from the heart. There were winter nights when I clutched my pillow, trembling in the corner, listening to his footsteps on the stairs. My heart pounded when the door burst open. The nightmare began again. He wrote that his father carried a belt, and each strike across my back made me wish I could vanish from this world. Years later, on Larry King Live, Gary's voice cracked as he recalled the man behind the microphone. He never hugged me, never said a kind word. The only thing I remember is that cold stare as he swung that belt down. And Gary wasn't alone. His brothers, Lindsay, Dennis, and Philip, carried the same scars. Lindsay Crosby was hospitalized several times at Cedars-Sinai for psychiatric care. Friends whispered that whenever White Christmas played on the radio, his hands shook, his body drenched in sweat, as if he were reliving the whippings all over again. Dennis Crosby tried to fight the memories, but couldn't escape them. Before taking his own life in 1989, he left behind a note that read, "I still hear his growls in my head. I tried to forgive, to forget, but every Christmas, the nightmare came back. I'm too tired." Just a year later, Lindsay followed the same tragic path, ending his life with a gun. The Los Angeles Herald-Examiner printed a headline that froze readers in disbelief. "Christmas King's sons die on winter nights." In a 1992 Los Angeles Times investigation, a former tour musician broke his silence. "I stood right outside the dressing room," he said. "I heard shouting, then the crack of something striking, then a child sobbing, then silence. We all heard it, but we turned away. Speaking up meant the end of your career." Hollywood debated endlessly whether Crosby's cruelty came from his own past. The Washington Post quoted psychologists who blamed his strict upbringing and an alcoholic father. But Paul Newman didn't buy it. During a 1985 Hollywood Reporter panel, he cut the room cold with his response. "Don't blame his childhood. He beat his kids because he liked the power. On stage, he controlled a crowd with his voice. At home, he wanted that same control over his family." The silence around Crosby was deafening. Everyone in Hollywood had heard the stories, but nobody dared to speak. Studios had too much money to lose. They needed the perfect Bing Crosby, the smiling man in the cardigan, the family Christmas icon who sold records and warmed hearts. So the cries behind those mansion walls were drowned out by the jingle of holiday cash registers and the sound of White Christmas echoing through every living room in America. Paul Newman later said that moment still haunted him. He paused during that Esquire interview, staring off as if remembering the ghosts of all the families that fame had broken. Then, with a sigh, he leaned in and mentioned another name. This time, not a father, but a woman whose beauty could silence an entire room. She wasn't just a star. She was a storm wrapped in diamonds and smoke. Her name was Marlene Dietrich, the legendary siren of the silver screen. Chapter 4. Marlene Dietrich, the goddess manipulator who turned love into tragedy. Picture this. One September night in 1955, inside a glittering Beverly Hills mansion where the city's elite gathered under crystal chandeliers and jazz music swirled in the air. The double doors opened, and there she was, Marlene Dietrich, draped in a black tuxedo, a cigarette holder balanced between her fingers, eyes sharp as knives. The moment she stepped in, the room fell silent. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. A Los Angeles Times reporter who was there later said, "The temperature seemed to drop a few degrees. Everyone felt she had walked in to choose her prey." Marlene didn't just enter a party. She owned it. Every glance, every movement was deliberate, magnetic, and dangerous. Behind that velvet voice and polished charm was a woman who used seduction like a weapon, a master manipulator who could turn affection into obsession and love into ruin. Marlene Dietrich wasn't just the star of the Blue Angel. She was the blue flame that could burn anyone who got too close. In 1930, she turned seduction into pure power. Every romance she had was a chess match where she always played queen. Men fell for her soft-spoken charm. Women were drawn to her fierce, daring confidence, but there was always one pattern that never changed. Those who stepped into Marlene's orbit ended up broken, drained, or forgotten. French filmmaker Jean Gabin once called the man Marlene truly loved, spiraled into depression after she left him. He vanished into solitude, hiding from the world that once adored him. Writer Éric Maria Remarque, author of All Quiet on the Western Front, was said to have become her personal wallet. Friends whispered that every time Dietrich appeared, his royalties disappeared into her shopping sprees and wild parties in Hollywood's secret social circles. But her wake of heartbreak didn't stop with men. Rumors connected her to Greta Garbo, MGM's untouchable ice goddess. Soon after their alleged affair, Garbo retreated deeper into isolation, her glow fading into the shadows of her Manhattan apartment. And Mercedes D'Acosta, the celebrated screenwriter and playwright, was said to have been used for her influence and connections. When Dietrich moved on, D'Acosta was left ruined and alone, dying in silence and poverty. Even Claudette Colbert wasn't spared from the storm. Whispers claimed she had been caught in a secret affair with Dietrich. When Colbert chose her career over the chaos, Dietrich cut her off completely, leaving her haunted by gossip for years. But the darkest chapter came in Paris with singer Edith Piaf. Their rumored affair ended in devastation. Friends remembered Piaf collapsing backstage in tears, crying out, "A love that only existed on one side." Marlene's cold detachment pushed Piaf deeper into addiction, despair, and a spiral that nearly destroyed her. Hollywood wasn't immune to Dietrich's spell either. In 1961, The Hollywood Reporter published an anonymous story about a young actress who broke her $1 million contract just to follow Dietrich around the world. Months later, abandoned and broke, she lost her home, her fame, and finally her life. The police found her in her Santa Monica apartment, a single note beside her that read only 3 words: "I hate you." Even her daughter wasn't spared. Maria Riva, in her 1992 memoir, revealed that growing up with Marlene was like living backstage at a never-ending performance. She wrote that her mother used people like props, vanishing with lovers while Maria waited for hours behind the curtain, forgotten and invisible. For Marlene, affection wasn't love, it was dominance. Scholars later tried to explain her, saying she'd learned as a young woman in Germany that power could be seized not by force, but through desire. To her, love wasn't connection, it was conquest. Every admirer was a role in her private film, every emotion a scene she directed. Paul Newman, who once crossed paths with her but managed to escape her grip, said it best in a 1983 CBS interview. Marlene treated human emotion like playing cards, and she played the game better than anyone. But behind her, all you saw were losers. After recounting the tale of Hollywood's goddess manipulator, Newman's tone shifted. He leaned in, voice low, eyes serious, as he moved from seduction to scandal, toward another Hollywood legend whose dark truth rattled him deeply. A man the world once saw as cheerful, innocent, even heroic, but whose private actions left deep scars that haunted the industry. That man was Mickey Rooney. Hollywood had worshipped him as a golden boy, a wholesome icon, the face of American youth. But behind that grin was a story the studios never wanted told. According to Elizabeth Taylor, who had worked with him at MGM, the truth was chilling. In 1974, during a private conversation, she broke down in tears, recalling her teenage years under the studio system. Paul Newman told Vanity Fair, "Liz looked at me, her voice shaking. She said, 'You don't understand. Mickey Rooney frightened me more than anyone. He wasn't the man you saw on screen.'" Newman said that was the moment he realized how deep Hollywood's rot went. The same man celebrated as the symbol of innocence had a reputation that terrified young actresses in secret. Back in the 1930s and 1940s, Mickey Rooney was MGM's moneymaker, the face of the Andy Hardy series, the all-American boy next door who filled theaters and made millions for the studio. In 1939, Life magazine hailed him as the little star with the biggest smile in Hollywood. But behind that smile, Paul Newman hinted, was a darkness that fame, money, and studio power had all helped to hide. Backstage whispers often told a far different story from the smiling headlines. A lighting technician once told the Los Angeles Times that Mickey Rooney could light up a room for the camera, then seconds later, explode in rage, screaming and smashing props to the floor if something went wrong. But what chilled everyone most wasn't his temper. It was how he acted toward Elizabeth Taylor when she was barely 14 or 15. After National Velvet hit theaters in 1944, Elizabeth became MGM's treasured jewel, their rising young star. Around that time, Rooney, nearly 25 and already one of the biggest box office names in the world, started showing a disturbing interest in her. In a 2003 ABC News feature, a classmate from Taylor's acting lessons recalled, Liz wore thick sweaters in the middle of summer just to shield herself from Rooney's stare. Once she grabbed my hand and whispered, trembling, "I just want to get out of here as quickly as possible." Years later, Taylor's private diaries from that era, released by her family, revealed haunting entries about sleepless nights and feeling trapped inside MGM's gilded cage. Hollywood, however, remained silent. MGM went to extreme lengths to protect their moneymaker. Rooney was their golden boy, their golden goose, as gossip columnist Hedda Hopper once called him in 1945. But the moment she hinted at anything controversial, she was ordered to retract it within 24 hours. A former editor told The Hollywood Reporter, "We were told directly, Mickey Rooney must remain innocent. Anyone writing otherwise would be blacklisted immediately." And so, the truth was buried. Elizabeth Taylor carried that wound quietly for the rest of her life. Friends said that whenever his name came up, she would freeze, her eyes going distant. In one 1960s interview, when a journalist mentioned Rooney, she abruptly stood up and left the room. The scar never healed. Rooney's personal life was a storm all its own. He married 8 times, some unions lasting mere months. His ex-wife, screen legend Ava Gardner, once told a reporter, "Living with Mickey was like living beside a tornado. You never knew when you'd get swept away." Former managers whispered that even in his later years, he bullied younger actresses, using the studio power MGM had once gifted him like armor. When fame faded, his chaos didn't. Rooney lost fortunes gambling, fell into debt, and eventually needed legal help to protect him from his own relatives' financial manipulation. Once Hollywood's richest young actor, he ended up living alone and nearly penniless, bitterly claiming the industry had abandoned him. But insiders quietly said, he's only tasting what he once sowed. During a 1982 verdict press conference, Paul Newman was asked about Rooney. He paused for a long moment, then said quietly, "Hollywood has smiles that hide darkness, and sometimes that darkness is more terrifying than the villains on screen." Mickey Rooney was the clearest proof of that deceit. The image was split right down the middle. On one side, America's beloved boy next door. On the other, the face that haunted Elizabeth Taylor and countless young co-stars. And if Rooney spread fear through obsession and control, the man Newman mentioned next took that darkness even further. Chapter 6. Kirk Douglas, the eccentric predator with a secret obsession for young girls. If Bing Crosby's brutality shattered his family, Kirk Douglas's reputation shook Hollywood's very foundations. The irony couldn't have been sharper. Douglas was the ultimate American hero, the iron-jawed symbol of masculinity who roared, "I am Spartacus," on screen. But off-set, witnesses painted a different picture, a man driven by power, ego, and dangerous appetite. Stories about Douglas began circulating as early as the 1950s, but the studios smothered them before they could reach daylight. The media, enchanted by his stardom, stayed obediently quiet. He was too valuable, too famous, too iconic to fall. But whispers never fully died. And one story, above all, refused to stay buried. It was the Natalie Wood story. In the summer of 1954, 15-year-old Natalie was taken by her mother, Maria Gourdin, to the Chateau Marmont Hotel on Sunset Boulevard. The meeting, according to her sister Lana Wood's memoir Little Sister 2020, was supposed to be a golden opportunity, a mentoring session that could advance Natalie's career. But only hours later, Natalie returned home shaken, her eyes red, her dress disheveled, and her silence deafening. Lana wrote in her book that Natalie's diary from that day contained a line that broke hearts decades later. "I can't tell anyone. Mother said I must stay silent if I want to keep acting. But I feel filthy, like everything has been stolen from me." That diary became the centerpiece of Hollywood's most whispered-about secret, a wound the industry refused to acknowledge. For decades, no one dared to print it. In 1980, when rumors resurfaced, they were immediately buried again, erased under pressure from powerful figures still protecting the old guard. Kirk Douglas, the man Hollywood worshipped as Spartacus, was quietly shielded for years, his charm, fame, and influence forming an armor no scandal could pierce. But Paul Newman, hearing the story later, reportedly said to a friend, "The truth about men like him was never meant to be told. It would destroy the myth that built this town." And with that, he hinted that behind the Hollywood hero who inspired generations, there might have been one of the industry's darkest, untold stories. When Natalie Wood drowned under mysterious circumstances near Santa Catalina Island with her husband Robert Wagner, the world froze in shock. Questions flooded the tabloids. Was her death somehow connected to secrets she had carried since her teenage years? Journalist Suzanne Finstad publicly asked that haunting question, but the trail went cold fast. Hollywood had a way of locking its skeletons away. And Natalie wasn't the only one who had whispered about Kirk Douglas. Other young actresses hinted at the same disturbing behavior for years. In a 1991 Los Angeles Times interview, a former Paramount wardrobe worker confessed, "Kirk Douglas always invited very young girls into his dressing room. If you refused, your career was finished." The rumor mill even claimed Douglas secretly recorded his encounters on VHS tapes hidden in a safe inside his Beverly Hills mansion, though, to this day, no hard proof has ever surfaced. What enraged the public most was how Hollywood still celebrated him. In 1996, President Bill Clinton awarded Douglas the Medal of Freedom, and in 2004, he was honored with an Academy Award for Lifetime Achievement. As he accepted, his hands trembling, Douglas said, "I am proud to have inspired generations of young people." But in the audience, veteran actresses exchanged knowing glances, silent, cold, and heavy. Paul Newman later reflected on this hypocrisy during a CBS 60 Minutes interview in 1985, saying, "Spartacus may have been a hero, but Kirk Douglas was never a hero, at least not to the young girls he hunted." That single sentence froze the studio in silence. The contradiction was brutal, a hero on screen, a predator in real life. Douglas's myth remained, but the whispers left a stain Hollywood could never scrub clean. And Newman wasn't finished. After speaking of Douglas's hidden darkness, he turned toward another towering figure, this time a woman once worshipped as Hollywood royalty. Chapter 7. Bette Davis, the queen of the screen and the tyrant of the set. With those blazing eyes and razor-edged voice, Bette Davis wasn't just an actress. She was a storm wrapped in silk. Critics called her Hollywood's crown jewel, and All About Eve, 1950, cemented her as one of cinema's fiercest legends. The New York Times even wrote that she could turn every line into a weapon. But those who worked with her behind the scenes had a far darker story to tell. To the crew, Davis wasn't a goddess. She was a nightmare. A Warner Brothers makeup artist told the Los Angeles Daily News, "She could smile sweetly during an interview, then 2 minutes later, scream at a co-star for standing slightly out of place. Her rage was legendary. Her words could cut deeper than any blade. Entire film sets would fall silent when she exploded, and her victims often locked themselves in dressing rooms to sob for hours. Her cruelty reached its infamous peak during the filming of Whatever Happened to Baby Jane, 1962, a film now remembered as much for its chaos behind the scenes as for its brilliance on screen. Variety described the set as a battlefield of smoke and fire. In one violent scene, Davis was supposed to shove Joan Crawford lightly to the floor, but instead, she used her full strength, sending Crawford crashing so hard she was hospitalized at Los Angeles Memorial. When reporters asked her about it, Davis coldly replied, "I was just doing my job. If she got hurt, that's her problem." Crawford didn't take that quietly. During another scene, she hid metal weights under her gown so that when Davis had to drag her, the strain nearly snapped her back. Davis suffered from spinal pain for weeks after, but neither woman backed down. An assistant director told Inside Hollywood in 1989, "No one could tell where the acting stopped and the hatred began. They turned the movie into real torture." But Crawford wasn't her only casualty. On the 1939 set of The Private Lives of Elizabeth and Essex, Davis slapped Errol Flynn so viciously that the red mark stayed visible for hours. Flynn later admitted in his memoir, "I felt more humiliated than from any real fight in my life." Even smaller roles weren't safe. A supporting actor on All This and Heaven 2, 1940, remembered being struck on the head with a script when he stumbled over a line. He quit acting soon after, saying, "Working with Bette Davis felt like living in a barracks under constant guard." Crew members feared her as much as they admired her. A script clerk once wrote in her diary, "When we heard the echo of her heels in the hallway, everyone froze. It felt like waiting for a storm to hit." Paul Newman, who once witnessed Davis publicly humiliate a young actress into tears, said later in Esquire, "No one denies Bette's talent, but I've never seen a woman spread so much fear on a set." Her career, brilliant as it was, left a trail of emotional wreckage. Davis was hailed as a genius, but remembered by many as Hollywood's most terrifying co-star. Behind every Oscar, there were tears, bruised egos, and silent crew members who had learned to flinch at the sound of her voice. And just when Newman thought the stories couldn't get darker, he revealed yet another Hollywood figure, a man famous for his tough guy image on screen, but whose cruelty off-set had been buried for decades. Chapter 8. Wallace Beery, the brutal giant and the covered-up death of Ted Healy. Back in the 1930s, Wallace Beery wasn't just a movie star. He was MGM's money machine. He ranked among Hollywood's highest-paid actors, beloved for his role as the gruff but loving father in The Champ, 1931, which even won him an Oscar. Variety called him a heart of gold beneath a shell of steel. But behind that warm, fatherly image, Beery was anything but gentle. He was a violent man whose name would be tied to one of Hollywood's most chilling secrets for decades. That secret was the mysterious death of Ted Healy, the legendary founder of the Three Stooges. On the night of December 21, 1937, at the Trocadero nightclub on Sunset Boulevard, Healy got into a heated altercation that turned deadly. Witnesses told the Los Angeles Times there was chaos, a brawl that left people diving for cover. One witness said, "A huge man who looked exactly like Beery was swinging punches heavy as hammers." Hours later, Ted Healy was found dead in his hotel room, his body covered in bruises. And just like that, the case went silent. Within days, MGM mysteriously arranged for Beery to vacation in Europe, far from the headlines. Then came the shocker. The LAPD ruled Healy's death as alcohol poisoning, and the investigation was closed without further questions. Journalist Sheila Graham wrote in Hollywood Citizen News, "Some stars are so powerful that even the law must step aside." Whispers spread fast. People began to believe Healy's death was one of Hollywood's most blatant cover-ups. And Beery's violent streak didn't end in nightclubs. It raged on inside MGM's own sets. He was infamous for tormenting young co-stars and even child actors. Mickey Rooney, in a 1991 interview, said it best. "Beery was built like a bear, and he liked proving it. Once I read a line wrong, and he slapped me so hard I fell flat. The crew froze, and Beery just laughed. I still remember that crack echoing in my ears." A lighting technician's unpublished memoir revealed even more disturbing behavior. He wrote that child extras always flinched when Beery walked by. He'd grab them, toss them into chairs, and laugh when they screamed. A young actor on Slave Ship, 1937, left production early after Beery allegedly squeezed his shoulder so hard it bruised purple. His family stayed silent. MGM had quietly paid them off. And his private life? Just as dark. His marriage to actress Gloria Swanson ended abruptly and violently. Years later, in her memoir, Swanson revealed that Beery had assaulted her during their marriage, forcing her to seek divorce at any cost. She described him bluntly. He only knew fists and brute force. When Paul Newman was asked about Beery in a 1981 Esquire interview, he frowned and said, "Hollywood knew these secrets well, but they chose to build legends instead of facing the truth." On screen, Beery played the tender father. Off screen, he spread fear with his fists. The mysterious death of Ted Healy, the hush money to families, and the abuse on set all painted Beery as one of the industry's darkest giants. And as Newman recalled that horror, his expression hardened. He immediately brought up another name, a woman whose cruelty wasn't physical, but emotional. A silent film queen whose ego devoured careers, friendships, and entire productions. Chapter 9. Gloria Swanson, the silent film queen who destroyed lives with her colossal ego. In the glittering 1920s, Gloria Swanson was untouchable. The ultimate symbol of glamour, she ruled Hollywood's silent era like a queen on her throne. She swept through red carpets draped in sequins, trailing fur coats across marble floors, entering theaters as if she owned the world. Photoplay magazine gushed in 1925. Gloria doesn't just act in films. She turns her life itself into a stage. But that stage became a pit that swallowed everything around her. By 1928, Swanson had taken the lead role in Queen Kelly, a film so ambitious it was supposed to redefine cinema itself. Directed by the notorious perfectionist Erich von Stroheim, the production began with lavish optimism and descended into chaos. Swanson's demands were relentless. A production worker later told the Los Angeles Examiner, "We had to rebuild entire sets just because she didn't like the color of the curtains or the fabric against her eyes. People were collapsing from exhaustion trying to please her." Costumes were torn apart and remade over and over again. Swanson insisted on new jewels, new gowns, even new lighting angles, all to flatter her face. The budget exploded. Crews worked through the night under suffocating heat, repainting palaces, only for Swanson to arrive and declare, "Tear it down, I've changed my mind." Hundreds of workers quit, others fainted from overwork, but MGM couldn't stop her. She was the studio's most profitable star, and she knew it. Her arrogance clashed violently with von Stroheim's equally massive ego, and soon the set became a war zone. Crew members whispered that their shouting matches could be heard blocks away. One assistant director wrote in his diary, "It felt like being trapped in a volcano. She screamed, he screamed, and the rest of us prayed to make it through the day alive." The disaster of Queen Kelly became Hollywood legend. The film was eventually banned in the US for being too scandalous, and the unfinished footage nearly bankrupted everyone involved. Yet Swanson walked away untouched, her name still shining on billboards, while dozens of crew members were blacklisted or left unemployed. Paul Newman would later comment that Swanson represented the other kind of Hollywood cruelty, the kind that doesn't need fists to destroy people. Her ego did the job for her. Behind the dazzling gowns and jeweled tiaras was a woman whose ambition crushed anyone who stood in her way. A queen whose kingdom glittered on screen, but bled behind the scenes. The budget exploded into chaos. Director Erich von Stroheim screamed in despair, watching his grand vision crumble before his eyes. In the end, he was fired, the production dissolved, and Queen Kelly became one of the most infamous disasters in Hollywood history. Hundreds of cast and crew were suddenly out of work, while Gloria Swanson's reputation survived, untouched by the wreckage she left behind. Off-screen, Swanson lived exactly as she ruled her film sets, like a queen who thought the world revolved around her. In 1930, the New York Herald Tribune reported that she commissioned a gown crusted with thousands of hand-cut crystals, worth more than an entire middle-class family's yearly income, and wore it only once to a charity gala. During the Great Depression, as Americans stood in endless breadlines, Swanson cruised through Los Angeles in gold-plated limousines, dripping in diamonds, and shopping as if the world's suffering didn't exist. One journalist wrote bitterly, "While the people begged for bread, Gloria hired jewelers to encrust her gloves with gems." Her obsession with status and perfection had turned her into a living monument of vanity. As sound films took over and silent stars adapted to survive, Swanson refused to accept reality. She truly believed she was still the center of the universe. When her career declined, she blamed everyone but herself. Directors, studios, and even audiences she accused of being too unsophisticated to appreciate her genius. Critics began calling her the Diva Destroyer, a queen whose ego burned everything it touched. Paul Newman, when asked about her in Esquire, said bluntly, "Some people think luxury keeps them at the top forever, but Hollywood never forgives those who make entire crews suffer for their ego." In her later years, Swanson lived in opulent solitude, surrounded by mirrors, fading gowns, and glittering jewels, yet with no one left to admire her. When she returned to the screen in Sunset Boulevard, 1950, playing an aging star lost in delusion, audiences shuddered. They realized they weren't just watching a performance, they were watching Gloria Swanson playing herself. Swanson turned her radiance into ashes. She dragged down everyone around her, directors, producers, even low-paid crew, just to feed her bottomless pride. But as her empire of glamour crumbled, another, far more tragic Hollywood tale began to unfold, a story of youth, fame, love, and death. Chapter 10. Sal Mineo, the doomed star and his deadly secret affair with Paul Newman. In the mid-1950s, Sal Mineo was on the rise. After Rebel Without a Cause, 1955, he was hailed as the next James Dean. Critics adored him, fans screamed for him, and studios fought for his signature. But behind that dazzling promise was a truth Hollywood refused to forgive. Mineo was openly gay in a time when being himself could destroy his entire career. The price was brutal. Contracts vanished overnight. Headlines turned cruel. In 1972, the New York Times published a piece titled "Honesty Punished," capturing exactly what had happened to him. By then, Mineo was deeply in love with stage actor Courtney Burr II, but what the world didn't know was that he was also entangled in a secret affair with Paul Newman himself. Witnesses later described the strange, quiet closeness between the two. A Greenwich Village bartender recalled, "Sal lit a cigarette with shaking hands, and Newman put his hand on his shoulder, almost like he was claiming him." The tension between love, fear, and exposure consumed Mineo. After his death, police recovered fragments of his private diary, and one line stood out like a cry from the grave. "I love Courtney, but Newman is my greatest fear. If the truth comes out, I'll pay the price." And then, the unthinkable happened. On February 12, 1976, Sal Mineo was found stabbed to death outside his West Hollywood apartment. Witnesses saw him collapse, his eyes wide, his mouth moving as if trying to name someone. But no words came out. Days later, the LAPD arrested a drifter, Lionel Ray Williams, claiming it was a random robbery gone wrong. But the case file was a mess of contradictions. The murder weapon mysteriously vanished, witness statements didn't match, and Williams's sudden confession came under suspicious circumstances. Then came the detail that froze Hollywood in disbelief. Paul Newman attended Mineo's funeral. He arrived quietly, avoided reporters, and left early without a word. But only days later, Mineo's apartment was broken into and his diaries and documents disappeared. The building manager later told investigators, "I saw a man in a dark coat, built just like Newman, enter that night." And as if that weren't eerie enough, Hollywood Insider published a bombshell in 1977. a leaked financial record showing a large transfer of money from a Newman-backed charity fund into an anonymous Los Angeles account, made right after the case was officially closed. Coincidence or cover-up? The whispers never stopped. Paul Newman never spoke of Sal Mineo again, and Hollywood made sure the story stayed buried. But those who knew Mineo believed his final words, "I'll pay the price." And he did, with his life. Not long after Sal Mineo's murder, the mystery only deepened. The FBI abruptly sealed every file connected to the case, pulling internal reports from circulation and citing lack of evidence. To many journalists, that move said everything. They believed someone powerful was being protected, someone whose clean public image had to stay spotless. And the man at the center of those suspicions was none other than Paul Newman. When reporters later pressed him about Sal Mineo, Newman stayed silent for what felt like an eternity before saying a single haunting line on 60 Minutes. Hollywood killed Sal, not with a knife but with silence. To the public, it sounded like an accusation, a statement condemning the system. But to those who knew the whispers behind the scenes, it sounded eerily like a confession. Newman had the fame, the money, and the influence to make stories disappear. He was, as one producer quietly said, the only man powerful enough to make everyone shut up. Sal Mineo died alone at 37, trapped between two worlds, one love that was open and pure, and another love that had to stay secret, hidden, and deadly. And while Sal's life ended in tragedy, Paul Newman's star only burned brighter. Oscars, medals, and magazine covers piled up as the public celebrated him as Hollywood's perfect man, handsome, kind, and moral. That contrast haunted people for years. Could the man who spoke so passionately about Hollywood's corruption have been hiding his own? Some insiders dared to ask the unthinkable. Had Newman silenced his forbidden lover to protect everything he'd built? Or worse, used his fame, fortune, and connections to bury the truth forever? Hollywood worshipped Newman as a legend, but behind the applause, the whispers grew darker. History still wonders. Was he the brave whistleblower who exposed the system's rot, or was he another player in the same deadly game? He moved through red carpets and galas with his trademark calm smile, a picture of grace and virtue. Yet some couldn't forget the chilling thought. If Sal Mineo's death wasn't random, then somewhere in the glamour walked the man who knew exactly what had happened and why. The Hollywood Paul Newman once described wasn't a dream factory. It was a haunted stage where devils wore designer suits and angels were sacrificed for fame. Behind every golden statue were bruised children, young girls trapped in silence, and men and women whose voices were buried by power. And the most terrifying possibility? That Newman himself, Hollywood's moral compass, may have been part of the very darkness he once condemned. Perhaps truth was his weapon not to expose others, but to protect his own secrets. So now, the question lingers in the shadows of Hollywood's history. Do these legends still deserve our praise? Was Paul Newman truly a man of truth, or was he hiding behind it? Share what you think below. Your perspective matters. Was Newman the hero history celebrates, or another ghost in Hollywood's glittering graveyard? And don't forget to subscribe, because the next name uncovered might just be the idol you still admire. The silver screen has many faces, but some of them hide the darkest hearts.